The morning Mei Lin was told she would be married. The sky was the color of old paper, and a crow had been sitting on the garden wall since before dawn. She noticed the crow first. She noticed most things before they were meant to be noticed. That was the particular curse of being the third daughter in a house where information was a currency more tightly controlled than money, and the house had run out of money 3 years ago. Her father called her into the main room just after breakfast. He was standing near the window with his back to her, which she had learned long ago was never a good sign. When fathers stood with their backs to daughters, they were either about to say something they were ashamed of or something they had already made peace with. The posture told her which one before he opened his mouth. Her elder sisters were not in the room. That told her even more. She stood near the doorway and waited. Her father, George Lin, was a man who had once been impressive. He still wore the memory of impressiveness the way old soldiers wore old uniforms. You could see where the shape had been, even if the fit was gone. He had built his trading house from nothing. He had fed 30 families at the height of his success. He had given her mother a garden with roses that came back every spring without being asked. The garden still came back every spring. Everything else was gone. He turned around and looked at her, and she saw it immediately, not guilt, not grief, but the flat, careful look of a man who had done the arithmetic and already filed the answer away somewhere he would not have to revisit. "You are to be married," he said. She did not say anything. She was good at not saying things. "To Duke Renwick," he said, "Lord of the Northern Estate. The arrangement is already made." She had heard the name before. The Northern Estate sat 3 days' ride from the city, up past the old bridge and into the province where the winters came 2 weeks earlier than everywhere else. Duke Renwick was spoken of in the way that people speak of things they are not sure are entirely real in low voices, with the particular emphasis of people who wanted to be believed, but were not entirely sure themselves. Old, they said, very old, some said 70, some said older. Mad, they said, though no one said what form the madness took, which was somehow worse than if they had described it. Reclusive, had not been seen in public in 11 years, did not attend the governor's gatherings, did not send representatives. Letters arrived from the estate once a month, written in a hand so precise and controlled it looked like a machine had made it, and those letters were the only evidence anyone had that the Duke still existed at all. She absorbed all of this in the span of a single breath. "When?" she asked. "The ceremony will be in 18 days. 18 days, not enough time to change anything, exactly enough time to understand that nothing was going to change. She looked at her father's face and found what she expected, no apology living there, no wrestle of conscience visible in the lines around his eyes. He had made his decision somewhere she had not been invited to, in the small hours of some night she had slept through, and the decision had settled in him the way stones settle in river mud. Permanent, already part of the landscape. "Is there a reason it is me?" she asked. The question surprised him. She could see that. He had prepared for tears, perhaps, for pleading, for the kind of scene that daughters in stories made when this kind of news arrived. "The other girls are already spoken for," he said. She understood. Her eldest sister was engaged to a merchant's son in the southern province, a modest arrangement, but secure. Her second sister had been married 2 years ago to a man who kept accounts for a shipping company. Both arrangements had been made in the years when there was still something to arrange with, when the Lin name still carried enough weight to place daughters somewhere reasonable. She was the last one, and the creditors had gotten more specific about timelines. She nodded once and said, "I see." She turned and walked back to her room, and her father did not call after her, and the crow on the garden wall opened its wings and flew east without making a sound. Her room was small and had always been small. She had made it into something by choosing carefully what lived in it. A shelf of books she had read 3 times each. A small writing desk near the window where the light came in at the right angle in the afternoon. A box at the bottom of the wardrobe where she kept her letters, notes from her old teacher before the school closed. 2 letters from a girl she had been friends with before that family moved away. A few pages she had written herself because they had felt true when she wrote them. She stood in the middle of the room for a long time, not moving. Then she opened the wardrobe and took out the box. She did not read the letters. She had already memorized them. She held the box for a moment, feeling its weight, and then she carried it to the window and set it down. From the window she could see the garden. The roses were not yet in bloom. It was early in the season, but the stems were green and the buds were forming, small and tight and closed, holding everything they were going to become right there in that compact shape. She thought about what it meant to be property, not unkindly, not with bitterness exactly, more the way you think about a mathematical fact, accurate, provable, not changed by how you feel about it. In the world she had been born into, daughters of merchant houses were assets before they were people. The asset was managed through marriage. That was the system. She had grown up inside the system the way fish grew up inside water, never quite seeing the edges of it but always shaped by them. The difference was that fish did not know they were in water. She had known for a long time. She carried the box to the small iron bowl she used in winter for burning scraps of paper against the cold. She went to the back of the garden where the stone path ended and the dirt began, and where no one could see her from the house windows. She put the letters in the bowl. She lit a match. She stood and watched them burn, and her face was very still, and her eyes were very dry, and the 2 sparrows watching her from the old plum tree had their heads tilted at that sharp bird angle that made them look like they were listening carefully to a conversation only they could hear. When the last piece of paper turned to ash, she felt something shift in her chest, not grief, nothing that soft. Something more like a door closing and the lock turning and the key being set down somewhere it would not be found again. Whatever she had kept in those letters, whatever small private version of herself she had stored in them, it was done now. Gone. It had never been a version of her that the world was going to let her keep anyway. She went back inside. She found the old maidservant, Mrs. Clara Dowd, in the kitchen, and told her that she would need help sorting her clothes before the journey. Mrs. Dowd was 63 years old and had worked in the Lynn household since before May Lynn was born, and she received this information with the particular careful blankness that servants wore when they already knew more than they were meant to. "Yes, miss," she said, "I will help you." "Will you be coming with me?" May Lynn asked. Mrs. Dowd's hands paused on the pot she was scrubbing, a small pause, the kind that lasted just one breath too long. "Yes, miss," she said again, "I am to accompany you." That confirmed something May Lynn had already suspected. The arrangement had been discussed with the household staff before it had been discussed with her. The kitchen had known this morning what she was only learning now. The servants had had time to prepare their own faces. She went back to her room and sat at her writing desk and opened her journal to a clean page. She wrote the date at the top. Below it, she wrote the name Duke Renwick, and below that she wrote the word, unknown. That was the honest accounting of it. She knew nothing about him except the rumors, and rumors were a specific kind of useless. They told you what people were afraid of, not what was real. What was real would be the estate, the rooms, the corridors and the silences and the way a household organized itself around the person at its center. She had learned early that if you wanted to understand a person, you did not ask them questions. You watched what their house did when they were not watching it. She would pay attention. That was all she had, and she was going to use it. She made a list, not of what she was losing, but of what she knew how to do. She could read and write in 3 languages. She could manage household accounts. She had a memory that kept things long after other people had let them go. She was patient in a way that other people sometimes found unsettling. She did not panic when things were quiet, and she did not panic when things were loud. These were her tools. They were going with her regardless of what her father had agreed to. Over the next 18 days, The house adjusted around her in the way houses adjust around someone who is about to leave. Her eldest sister came home for 2 days and held her hands and said things that were meant to be comforting. Her second sister sent a letter with a bracelet enclosed and a note that said only, "Be careful and be clever," which was better advice than anything else she received. Her father gave her 3 things the evening before the carriage came: a small amount of money in a sealed envelope, a list of what had been arranged, rooms she was promised, staff she was entitled to, provisions that were part of the agreement, and a piece of paper with the Duke's seal stamped and signed in that precise machine-like handwriting, confirming the arrangement. He held these things out and she took them. He started to say something and then did not say it. She saved him the trouble of finding it. "I know you had no other choice," she said. He blinked. That was not what he had expected her to say. He had expected accusation or forgiveness, one of those 2 things. She was offering him neither. She was offering him the truth as she understood it plainly, without dressing it up. He said quietly, "I hope it will not be as bad as people say." "I will manage," she said. She went back to her room and read all 3 documents very carefully, then folded them and put them in the inside pocket of her traveling coat. The carriage came at first light, 2 trunks, loaded with the efficiency of men who were not moved by the weight of what they carried. Mrs. Dowd climbed in first. Mei Lin climbed in after her. She did not look back at the house as the carriage moved, not from bitterness, simply because looking back would not change anything and looking forward was the only direction that had any future in it. The carriage moved through the city streets, still quiet at this hour, past the market stalls being set up for the morning, past the old temple with its gates standing open, past the long row of houses that pressed close on either side of the road like people leaning in to hear a secret. And then the city was behind them, and the road opened up, and the sky was vast and pale, and the color of things that had not yet decided what they were going to be. Mei Lin pressed her back against the carriage seat and breathed in and let it go. She thought about what 3 days' travel meant, and what would be waiting at the end of it. She did not know, but not knowing had never stopped her before. Outside the window, the road unrolled ahead of them like a question with no answer yet, and the horses moved steadily north, and the city fell away behind them, and Mei Lin, sole daughter, future duchess, woman with a burned box of letters and 3 languages in her head and patience like a slow, clean river, watched the countryside arrive and said nothing and missed nothing, and was already, in the way that mattered, completely prepared for whatever came next. The road north changed the moment the last city building disappeared from sight. The city had texture, sound layered on sound, the smell of food and people and animals and stone that had absorbed centuries of rain. Out here, the texture was different and slower, and required a different kind of attention to read. Trees that had been standing long enough to have their own weather systems. Farmland arranged in careful rectangles the way practical people arranged everything. Villages announced first by wood smoke, then by the sound of dogs, then by the brief sight of people going about their mornings with the momentum of people who had nowhere else to be. Mei Lin watched it all and let it accumulate without trying to make sense of it yet. Mrs. Dowd sat across from her and worked on a piece of embroidery, a small pillowcase with a flower pattern she had been working on for what appeared to be quite a long time, based on how worn the edges of the cloth were. She did not speak. She was not, Mei Lin had long understood, a woman who spoke without a reason. It was late afternoon when they stopped at an inn to water the horses and eat. The inn was run by a wide-shouldered woman named Mrs. Penny Oaks, who looked at Mei Lin the way people looked at someone they knew was passing through, interested, but only briefly. They ate barley soup thick enough to hold a spoon upright, bread that was still warm. "Do you know anything about the estate?" Mei Lin asked Mrs. Dowd during the meal. A pause. Mrs. Dowd set down her embroidery. "A little," she said. "What I have heard, it is large. The household staff is small for the size of the property, fewer than 20 people. The east wing is kept closed. She stopped. And the Duke himself. I only know what I have heard, the same things anyone has heard. Old Maylin said, and said to be mad. Said to be, Mrs. Dowd agreed, and left it exactly there, in that precise place between what people said and what anyone knew for certain. Said to be, a useful phrase. It meant that someone had started a story and the story had traveled, and along the way it had picked up the weight of repetition until it felt like fact. But stories that traveled often arrived wearing the wrong clothes. The clothes were the rumor. Underneath the clothes was usually something more ordinary and more specific and more real. What was real would reveal itself. The second day took them into higher country. The air was sharper. It had an edge that the city air never had, a clean coldness that arrived in the lungs like information. They crossed the old stone bridge shortly after noon, wide and solid, built in a time when people built things to outlast the people who built them. Below it, a river ran dark and quick over smooth rocks. Someone had left white flowers on the bridge railing, fresh flowers, which meant recently, which meant this was still a place people stopped at and considered. She did not ask about them. By the third afternoon, the estate announced itself before it came into view. The road changed, better maintained, lined with old trees planted deliberately to frame the approach. Someone had thought about this road. Someone had decided that the arrival should feel like something. Then the gate came into view. Iron, very tall, worked in patterns she could not quite read from the moving carriage. Beyond it, a long drive led toward a house that was not what she had expected. She had expected something grim, something that matched the rumors. What she saw instead was simply large. Old, yes. Stone that had been standing so long it had taken on the color of the landscape around it, gray-green and weathered. But the windows were tall, not narrow. The kind of windows that let in a great deal of light. The curtains were, she noticed, mostly closed. A footman with fair hair and a carefully neutral expression opened the carriage door. "Miss Lynn, welcome to Renwick Hall." She stepped down, and the house rose above her, 4 stories on the main face, wings extending on both sides. Old unpruned roses grew on a trellis to the right of the entrance, reaching along the stone in the undisciplined way of something growing under its own direction with no one to shape it. A woman appeared in the doorway, perhaps 50, dressed in deep blue, posture like someone who had spent many years being the most organized person in whatever room she occupied. "Miss Lynn, I am Mrs. Agnes Holt. I manage the household." Something moved briefly behind her eyes, not hostility, not warmth, something more neutral than either. "Your rooms are prepared. Dinner is served at 7. The east wing of the house is not in current use. The Duke is not well enough for visitors at present." A pause that lasted 3 full seconds. "I see," Maylin said. "It is hoped that in time," Mrs. Holt stopped herself. "The arrangements were made with full sincerity," she said, and the careful way she said it meant she had rehearsed it. "I am not worried," Maylin said. She followed Mrs. Holt inside. Along the hallway, portraits of Renwick generations looked out from their frames. She stopped at one near the far end, a young man with a direct gaze and something about his mouth that might have been amusement or might have been challenge. "Who is this?" she asked. "The first Duke," Mrs. Holt said. "He built the house. He looks like he found something funny." Mrs. Holt blinked. "I had not thought about it that way," she said. Her rooms were on the 2nd floor. Fire lit, bed made with precise clean linen. Flowers at the exact center of the table, placed the way things are placed when someone wants to demonstrate effort rather than express it. The north window looked over the side garden, once well maintained, now beginning its own negotiation with what it wanted to become. The west window looked toward a stand of large old oaks just coming into new leaves. She could not see the east wing from here. That was interesting. She sat at the window seat and thought. The household was built around something. She could feel it the way you felt load-bearing walls even when you could not see them, the way everything else organized itself relative to them. The east wing was the load-bearing wall. The closed curtains, the careful language of Mrs. Holt, the deliberate avoidance in the footman's eyes, all of it arranged around something that was both the center of the house and the part of it that everyone was most careful not to mention directly. The Duke was in there, she was fairly sure. But the question that interested her was not where he was. The question was why an old man who was not well enough for visitors had nonetheless arranged a marriage with enough legal weight to make it irreversible. People who were too ill to be seen did not make complex arrangements without a reason that went beyond the obvious. She would find the reason. She had years, apparently. She would find it by watching and by listening and by doing the one thing she was better at than almost anything else, paying attention to what the house did when it thought no one was watching it. Outside the west window, a wind moved through the oaks, and the new leaves turned against each other. And the sound they made was like many small, careful voices, all saying something in a language she had not yet learned. She would learn it. That was what she did. The ceremony was held on a gray Thursday morning 18 days after her father's announcement, in the main reception hall of Renwick Hall, with 14 people in attendance, and an empty chair in red silk where her husband was meant to stand. The chair had been positioned at the front of the room with the precision of something important. It sat on a small raised platform, draped in rich red fabric that pooled slightly at the base, and it had the Duke's seal affixed to the back in carved wood, not decorative but official, the way a document was official. This was not a symbolic gesture. This was a legal instrument with upholstered legs. Mei Lin stood in her white dress, which was not quite the right shade of white for this kind of ceremony, being slightly ivory, slightly warm, which was the only shade of white her father had been able to arrange in 18 days. And she looked at the chair and understood immediately that this was the Duke's statement as much as it was his absence. He was not here because he could not be here, but the chair was here because whoever had arranged the ceremony wanted her to understand that his authority was present even when he was not. She filed that away. The ceremony was performed by a magistrate named Mr. Oliver Finn, who was perhaps 45. With reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose, and a voice that was more suited to reading documents aloud in a small room than projecting it across a large one. He read the words of the ceremony. He paused at the correct intervals. He looked at the chair when the Duke's responses were required, and a man standing next to the chair, a man she had not been formally introduced to, who was tall, perhaps 30, standing with the posture of someone who had spent a great deal of time being the most competent person in the room and was quietly bored by it. This man spoke the Duke's responses in a clear, measured voice. Spoke them as if he had read them many times, as if he had prepared. She filed that away too. She spoke her own responses clearly and without hesitation, because hesitation in the middle of an irreversible thing served no useful purpose. She looked at the magistrate when she spoke. She did not look at the chair. She did not look at the tall man beside the chair. She looked at the magistrate and said what needed to be said, and her voice was steady throughout. When it was done, the magistrate declared the arrangement complete, and there was a brief sound from the assembled guests that was not quite applause, but was in that general region of social noise. People who felt they should make some acknowledgement but were not entirely sure what kind of acknowledgement the occasion called for. She was a duchess now. That happened inside a room of 14 people and an empty chair, on a gray Thursday morning, and the moment it happened it was indistinguishable from the moment before it except in a purely legal sense. A reception followed in the adjoining room. Small tables with food and tea. The 14 guests moved carefully around each other, making conversation with the particular effort of people at an event where the correct emotional register was unclear. Several of them were estate staff, Mrs. Holt, the footman with the fair hair whose name she had learned was Peter Ash, and a few others she did not yet have names for. 3 were local men she understood to be the solicitors and legal witnesses required by law. The rest she could not yet categorize. The tall man from the ceremony stood near the window of the reception room with a cup of tea he did not drink. He was looking out at the garden, or giving a very convincing performance of looking out at the garden, and she understood that this was a person who had positioned himself precisely far enough from the social center of the room that he could not be comfortably approached, but close enough to the exit that anyone watching him would think he was simply passing through. He was not passing through. He had been here the whole morning. He had spoken her husband's wedding vows in a voice that did not waver. She crossed the room. She did it directly, not as a detour, not as an afterthought. He turned from the window when she was still 3 steps away, which told her that despite the pose, he had been aware of the room the entire time. "You spoke the responses," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not elaborate. He did not apologize for it or explain it or wrap it in any social softening. He simply confirmed it. She looked at him. He was tall in a way that took up space without being aggressive about it. His face was arranged in an expression of complete neutrality that was, she recognized, the result of conscious effort, the expression people wore when they were choosing not to reveal anything, and were good enough at choosing that the neutrality itself became the information. "You are not the Duke," she said. "No." "Then who are you?" A brief pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to answer, but the pause of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. "Lord Adrian Shen," he said. "I am the Duke's nephew." She processed that. "You manage things for him," she said. It was not quite a question. Something moved in his expression, very small, there and gone in under a second. "In certain capacities," he said. "In the capacity of speaking at his wedding, for instance." The smallest possible acknowledgement of that, not quite a nod, not quite a smile, something that lived in the space between them. "The Duke is not well," he said. "He was unable to attend." Mrs. Holt mentioned that. He was aware that his absence would be notable. The chair was his suggestion. A pause. He wanted the legal requirements fulfilled correctly. He is very particular about legal requirements being fulfilled correctly. Even when it requires his nephew to stand beside a decorated chair and speak his wedding vows for him. Lord Shen looked at her for a moment. She had the impression that she had said something he had not expected, and she had the further impression that he was not often surprised and found it slightly uncomfortable. "The arrangement was made with full legal authority," he said, and the words were almost identical to what Mrs. Holt had said, which meant that this was the agreed-upon answer, the version of the truth that had been prepared and distributed to the appropriate people. "I am not questioning the legality," she said. "I am observing that it is an unusual ceremony." "Yes," he said simply, "it is." That was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in the last hour, and she appreciated it the way she appreciated plain food after a long journey, not exciting, but exactly right. She had more questions, many more, but she had also learned long ago that a great number of questions deployed at once was the most efficient way to ensure that none of them were answered. People closed down when they felt interrogated. They opened when they forgot they were being observed. She excused herself and went to speak to Mrs. Holt about the household arrangements for the week. Behind her she was aware, without looking, that Lord Shen had moved back to the window. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, she learned the house. She did it methodically, the way she did most things. She walked every corridor of the main wing and the south wing every morning before breakfast, at first with Mrs. Holt accompanying her, and then alone when Mrs. Holt understood that she would not get lost and was not looking for company. She introduced herself to each member of the staff, not as a woman confirming her authority, but as a woman who wanted to know who she was living with, because they were the ones who actually knew how this house operated, and she had always found honest information far more useful than official information. The cook was a broad, capable woman named Mrs. Ruth Lacey, who had been at the estate for 20 years, and who gave Mei Lin a very direct look on their first meeting, and then, apparently satisfied with something she saw there, offered her a piece of apple cake without being asked, and explained the kitchen schedule with the clarity of someone who had never needed to explain it before, but was willing to do so once if it meant not having to do it again. The fair-haired footman, Peter Ash, she found out, had been at the estate for 3 years and came from a town 2 provinces south. He was 24 and careful and slightly afraid of her, which she found both unremarkable and easy to work around. There was a groundskeeper named Mr. Edgar Rowe, who was perhaps 60, and said fewer words in a week than most people said in an hour, but who maintained the gardens and the outer grounds with a devotion that was its own kind of eloquence. She found him one morning repairing a section of the garden wall that had begun to come apart, doing it with the patient, precise attention of someone who understood that a wall only stayed standing if it was tended. And she stood and watched him for a few minutes and said nothing, and he glanced at her once and went back to his work, and she decided she liked him. The east wing remained closed. She did not attempt to open it. She noted its doors, 2 of them, both heavy, both locked, and she noted which staff members' eyes went briefly in that direction when they were talking about something else, and she noted that there were sounds sometimes, late in the evening, from that side of the house. Not alarming sounds. Not the sounds that rumors might have led you to expect, no shouting, no disturbance. Quieter than that. The sound of movement. Occasionally, very faintly, what she thought might be a voice. Lord Shen appeared at meals. He sat at the other end of the long dining room table from her, which was so long that sitting at the other end was effectively sitting in a different room that happened to share walls. He ate with the efficiency of someone who regarded food primarily as fuel. He occasionally read while eating, which would have been rude at most tables, but at this table seemed more like common sense, given the distance between them. She started bringing a book as well. One evening, perhaps 10 days after the ceremony, she looked up from her book to find that he was not reading. He was looking at her from his end of the table with an expression that she could not quite categorize, too specific to be blank, not specific enough to name. She looked back at him. He went back to his book. She went back to hers. The next evening, she asked Mrs. Holt how long Lord Shen had been living at the estate. Mrs. Holt's expression did what it always did when she was deciding how much to say. It went very slightly more careful, like someone stepping onto ice and checking its thickness before committing. Lord Shen has managed the estate's affairs for the past several years, she said. He has rooms in the main wing. Does he always eat at the estate? He has his own responsibilities that require him to be here regularly. Yes. I see. She had noticed that Mrs. Holt's most informative answers were the ones she did not give. Everything she actually said was technically truthful and told you approximately nothing. Everything she did not say told you a great deal. What she did not say was, how long. She did not give a number of years. She did not specify whether managing the estate's affairs was a temporary arrangement or a permanent one. What she said was, regularly, which meant constantly, which meant Lord Shen had been living at this estate, or very close to living at this estate, for an amount of time that Mrs. Holt found it better not to specify. That night, lying in her bed with the west window slightly open so the oak trees could speak their leaf language into the room, Mei Lin thought about the chair at the ceremony, about the precision of the seal on its back, about the person who had arranged a marriage from somewhere in this house without appearing at the ceremony, about the nephew who had stood at the front of the room and spoke the vows for him. She thought about all of this very carefully, and the more carefully she thought about it, the more the shape of something began to appear in the outline of what she did not yet know, not yet specific, not yet something she could name, but shaped, intentional. Someone in this house had built something that looked like a standard arrangement, but felt, on examination, like something else entirely. She pressed her hand flat against the cool wall beside her bed, just to feel something solid, and thought, for the first time since she had left the city, that this was genuinely interesting. Not comfortable, not simple, not what anyone had told her it would be, but interesting. That was enough for now. 3 weeks after the ceremony, a woman named Miss Dorothy Finch arrived at the estate with a letter and a package, and the particular expression of a person delivering something they were not sure would be well received. Mei Lin was in the library when she arrived, the library being one of the rooms she had made a personal project of reacquainting with its purpose, since it appeared to have been arranged as storage for books rather than a room for reading them, volumes shelved without clear logic, several sections still in packing crates, two comfortable chairs positioned facing a wall rather than a window. She had been quietly reorganizing for 3 days and had found 17 books she wanted to read, and one that appeared to be a journal written in a hand she did not recognize, which she had set aside for later consideration. The letter was from her second sister, Alina, and it contained the kind of news that was delivered in letters when the sender was not sure of the reception. Their father's creditors had settled, the debts were cleared, the Lin house was no longer in danger. She read this 3 times and then set it down and looked at the window and thought about what it meant. It meant that the arrangement, which had been described to her as necessary, was now no longer necessary. It meant that if she had been told to wait another 2 months, there would have been no need for an arrangement at all. She folded the letter very precisely and put it in her pocket. She did not burn it. That impulse was gone. She was keeping things now. Miss Dorothy Finch turned out not to be a message carrier, but rather someone her second sister had engaged as a companion for her. A young woman, perhaps 22, with bright, clever eyes and the manner of someone who had spent considerable time working out how to be useful to people without making them feel that they were being managed. She was from a respectable family that had reduced circumstances, she explained, and she hoped to be helpful. She was going to be very helpful, Mei Lin thought. Not because she wanted a companion, but because Miss Finch clearly noticed things, and a person who noticed things and was positioned to move through the house with natural ease was, in this particular situation, an extraordinary resource. "Can you read aloud?" Mei Lin asked. "Very well," said Miss Finch, who seemed to know that this was a test of something rather than a simple inquiry. "Can you carry on a conversation while I am thinking about something else?" A pause, then, "I can tell when people are thinking and leave them to it." "Good," Mei Lin said, "then we will get along." Miss Finch moved into a room 2 doors down from Mei Lin's and integrated herself into the household with the quick-footed ease of someone who was good at reading rooms. Within 4 days, she had made friends with Mrs. Lacey in the kitchen, learned the footman Peter Ash's full schedule, and discovered that the locked east wing had a third door that Mei Lin had not found, a small service entrance at the back of the main hall, behind a curtain that had been hung there long enough to look structural. She reported this to Mei Lin with the careful phrasing of someone who was not entirely sure whether what she was doing was helpful or overstepping. "That is very useful," Mei Lin said. "Thank you." Miss Finch visibly relaxed. "I also learned," she said, "that Lord Shen goes into the east wing every morning between 7 and 8 o'clock. Mei Lin looked up from the account book she had been reviewing. "Every morning," she said. "Without exception. Mrs. Lacey mentioned it because she prepares a tray at 6:50, and he takes it in before any of the other staff arrive. A tray prepared daily, taken in before the staff, to the east wing where the Duke was not well enough for visitors. Except Lord Shen was not, technically, a visitor." She put the account book down. It was late November now. The estate's grounds had changed with the season. The oak trees outside her west window had lost most of their leaves, and what remained hung on in the particular stubborn way of things that knew their time was limited, but refused to concede it early. The gardens had gone to their winter state. The walls of the estate became more visible as the plant life thinned, and she found on her morning walks that she was beginning to understand the shape of the place in a way she had not during the green months. Bare structure told you more than leafy decoration. You could see the bones. She was seeing bones now, in more ways than one. She began going to the library at 6:30 in the morning. The library was positioned at the corner of the main hall, and from its door, if the door was left slightly open at the right angle, you could see the entrance to the hidden service door behind the curtain. She was not hiding, she was simply in the library early, with the door open, reading. On the fourth morning, she heard Lord Shen's footsteps in the hall at 6:55. She had learned his particular footstep by this point. He walked with a slightly longer stride on the left than the right, an asymmetry so small it was only audible on stone floors, and she had been paying attention to stone floors for 3 weeks. She listened to his footsteps pass. She listened to the small sound of the curtain being moved, a door, silence. She went back to reading. 20 minutes later, the footsteps returned, same slightly uneven rhythm, past the library, down the corridor toward his rooms. She did this for 3 more mornings before she did anything else with the information. On the 7th morning, she waited until his footsteps had gone, and then she put down her book, and she got up, and she walked to the curtain. She did not open the door. She stood before the curtain for a moment with her hand near the fabric and thought about what she was doing and what she was deciding. She was deciding whether she was the kind of person who waited for information to be given to her or the kind of person who went and found it. She already knew the answer to that question. She had always known the answer to that question. She was asking it formally because the stakes here were different. This was not a room she had been given permission to enter. This was not a door that had been offered to her. What was behind that door was the center of the household silence, and silence this organized and this sustained was not an accident. It was a system, and she was deciding whether she was inside the system or whether she was going to step outside it. She let her hand drop. Not yet. There were still things she could learn without opening doors that the house had specifically kept closed. She was patient. She was thorough. She would understand the full shape of the thing before she moved on it. She went back to the library. That same afternoon, she found the journal. She had set it aside earlier when she discovered it, a small brown volume, different from the others on the shelf, no title on the spine, wedged between 2 large agricultural texts where it had clearly been placed to disappear. She brought it to her chair by the window, the one she had repositioned to face the garden, and she opened it. The handwriting was familiar. She had seen it once before, on the contract of her marriage. The same precise control, the same even spacing, the same particular way the letters formed that made them look machine-made. It was the Duke's. The earliest entry was dated 14 years ago. She did not read from the beginning. She read from the middle, carefully, the way you read something that was not written for you, alert to context, watching for the shape of the story beneath the individual words. The middle entries were from 8 years ago and they contained a name, Adrian. Always Adrian, never a full name, never Lord Shen. Adrian arrived in spring and the house was different afterward, one entry said. Adrian asked about the East Wing today. I did not answer him. He will understand eventually that some things in this house are not explained. They are simply carried. She read on. Adrian manages the accounts now. He is better at it than I was. He does not like to admit that he is better at anything than the person who taught him. That is the pride of people who are afraid that being good at something takes something away from the person they learned it from. She stopped. She read that sentence again. She closed the journal and sat with it in her lap for a long time. Outside the window, Mr. Edgar Rowe was moving through the winter garden, checking his wall repairs. She watched him walk the perimeter of the section he had rebuilt, running his hand along the stones to test their fit, his face concentrated and unhurried. She thought about what she had read, about the precision of a man who wrote about his nephew the way other people did not write about nephews, with that quality of attention, that specificity of observation, the noticing of things that people only noticed when they cared about someone deeply, and had decided to be honest about it in the one place they could be honest, which was a journal kept between two large agricultural texts where no one would think to look. She put the journal back on the shelf, exactly where she had found it, exactly the same angle. That evening at dinner, Lord Shen was already at his end of the table when she came in. He had his book open, which was his signal, she had learned this, that he was not intending conversation. She respected it. She opened her own book. Halfway through the meal, without looking up, he said, "How are you finding the library?" She kept her eyes on her page. "Someone has been reorganizing it." "Yes." "You disagree with the system she has chosen." A brief pause. "Not with the system, with the placement of the natural history volumes. They were organized by size rather than subject." "They are now organized by subject." Another pause. "I noticed." She turned a page. He turned a page. "I moved them on purpose," she said. "I know." She looked up. He was still reading. "I was curious," she said, "whether you would say something." He looked up then. Across the long length of the dining table, in the evening light, his expression was completely neutral except for something small and specific in the area of his eyes. She could not quite name it. She filed it under ongoing investigation. "And now I have," he said. "And now you have," she agreed, and went back to her book. That night in her room, she did not sleep for a long time. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and thought about a man who wrote in a journal about his nephew's pride and called it care. About a nephew who appeared at a wedding to speak vows for a man who could not be there. About an east wing that everyone moved around without acknowledging, and about the tray that went in every morning at 6:55. She thought about the letter in her pocket that said the debts were cleared. 2 months too late for the arrangement not to have been made. 2 months too late for her to still be in her own room with her burned box of letters and her collection of books read 3 times each. She was here now. That was the only fact that mattered. She was here, and the house was full of things that were not yet explained. And she was, slowly and carefully, and with a patience that other people had always found slightly unsettling, beginning to understand the architecture of all the things that no one had told her. She found the portrait on a Tuesday in early December, in a room on the south corridor that she had not properly examined before because it was used for storage and contained 17 years of estate paperwork and the smell of old paper and careful neglect. She had not been looking for anything specific. She was cataloging the room, writing down what it contained, because that was what she did. She made lists of what was real. When she moved a rolled-up landscape painting that was propped against the back wall and found, behind it, a framed portrait. It was not very large, perhaps 20 inches wide, 30 tall. An oil painting, done in the style of a generation ago, the slightly more formal composition, the particular way the light fell in portraits of that period, landing from the left at an angle that was meant to suggest character. The paint was still bright enough that it had not been stored very long, or had been stored in conditions good enough to preserve it. The portrait showed 2 figures. One was Lord Shen, not as he was now but younger, perhaps 17 or 18, the face not yet settled into its current careful neutrality, still carrying the slight unfinished quality of a face that had not yet decided what it would eventually become. He was standing with the composed posture that she recognized, but in the painting the composure looked practiced rather than natural, the way young people looked when they were learning an expression rather than inhabiting one. Beside him, a boy of perhaps 12. She looked at the boy for a long time. He was slight and dark-haired, and looking directly at the painter with an expression that she recognized before she could identify where she had seen it before, direct, interested, not in the least afraid of being looked at. An expression that invited evaluation rather than avoided it. On his right hand, clearly painted, unmistakably intentional, a seal ring. The ring belonged to the Duke. She stood in the storage room with the portrait in her hands and thought carefully about what she was looking at. The boy was not more than 12. Lord Shen, in the portrait, was 17 or 18. If Lord Shen was now 30, and he was, she had established that fairly precisely by triangulating references in the journal and in conversations she had quietly steered in useful directions. Then the portrait was 12 or 13 years old. The boy in the portrait was 12 years old and wearing the Duke's ring, which meant the boy in the portrait was the Duke. She put the portrait down very carefully against the wall, exactly as she had found it. She stood in the storage room for a moment and breathed and let the shape of this settle. Then she walked back to the library, sat down in her reorganized chair by the window, and opened her journal to a clean page. She wrote at the top of the page what I know, and below it what I think, and below that what I cannot yet confirm. Under what I know, there is a Duke Renwick. The estate, the title, the legal authority all belong to him. Letters come from the estate once a month. The East Wing is locked. Lord Shen has been managing this estate for several years, possibly more. Under what I think, the boy in the portrait with the ring is the Duke. If he was 12-13 years ago, he is approximately 25 now. Not 70. Not mad. 25 and not well and living in the East Wing of his own estate behind a locked door. Under what I cannot yet confirm. Why? Why the secrecy? Why the rumor of an old man was allowed to stand when the reality was so different? Why, if the Duke is 25 and was capable of arranging a legal marriage contract with precise detail, he has never appeared? She looked at the page. She added one more item under what I think. Lord Shen did not know about this marriage when it was arranged, or he knew and was not given the choice to refuse it. She closed the journal. She sat for a long time with the closed journal in her lap, looking at the bare oak trees beyond the window. The Duke had arranged her marriage. A man perhaps 4 or 5 years younger than herself had, from somewhere in the East Wing of this house, looked over the available arrangements and decided upon this one. Had written the contract in that precise hand. Had instructed his nephew to speak his vows. The nephew who managed the estate, who had been here for years, whose pride had been written about in a journal with more care than most people wrote about their closest friends. Something tightened in her chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something more preliminary than anger, the feeling you got when the shape of a thing became clear enough to see, when the confusion sorted itself into something legible, and what was legible was not entirely what you would have chosen. She had been arranged. She had understood that from the beginning her father had arranged her. That was the oldest story there was. But she had believed, even in the worst version of her own situation, that the arrangement was at least straightforward. Old man, sold daughter, simple transaction. This was not straightforward. She did not know what this was yet, but she was beginning to know what it was not. That afternoon she went to Mrs. Holt's office, a small neat room near the back of the main wing, where the housekeeper managed the household accounts and correspondence, and she knocked and went in and sat down across from Mrs. Holt's desk with the particular quality of stillness that she had learned over the years was more effective than any amount of directness. You sat still, and you waited, and people, uncomfortable with the weight of an unanswered quiet, filled it. Mrs. Holt was not a person who was easily made uncomfortable. She was, however, a person with a conscience. "I found a portrait in the South Corridor storage room," Maylin said. A pause so brief it was almost not a pause. "Yes," Mrs. Holt said. "It shows Lord Shen and a boy. The boy is wearing the Duke's ring." Nothing in Mrs. Holt's expression moved, but her hands, which had been resting flat on the desk, shifted slightly. A weight redistribution, the only honest thing in an otherwise controlled response. Yes, she said again. How old is the Duke? Mei Lin asked. A longer pause, the kind that meant a decision was being made. I am not sure it is my place to, Mrs. Holt began. You manage this household, Mei Lin said, not unkindly. You know everything that happens in it, and I am the Duchess of this estate, which was arranged by the Duke himself, which means he trusted me with this title. I am asking you to trust me with the truth that the title comes with. Mrs. Holt looked at her. For perhaps 10 seconds she simply looked, and Mei Lin held her gaze and held her stillness and waited. He will be 26 in the spring, Mrs. Holt said finally. 26, 4 years younger than Mei Lin herself. What is wrong with him? She asked. Another pause, shorter this time. The decision had already been made. His lungs, Mrs. Holt said. He has had lung trouble since he was a child. Some years are better, some years are not. She stopped. This year has not been good. Who spread the rumor that he was old? Mei Lin asked. And mad. No one spread it deliberately, Mrs. Holt said. The title is old. The name is old. People assumed, and the assumption was never corrected. Lord Shen felt it was safer for the Duke to be misunderstood than to be accurately known. Because an accurate account of a young Duke, who had never been seen and was often ill, would invite a different kind of attention. Yes, a young Duke with significant holdings and no visible heir would invite a great deal of attention from a great many people who did not have his interests as their primary concern. Yes. Mei Lin sat with this for a moment. Who arranged the marriage? She asked. Mrs. Holt's hands moved again, that same small shift. His Grace arranged it himself, she said, with the full agreement of Lord Shen. You are certain of the full agreement? A breath, he was told, he did not refuse. Being told and agreeing were different things. Not refusing and agreeing were very different things. She noted the distinction without pointing to it. Thank you, she said, that is helpful. She left Mrs. Holt's office and walked back through the main hall. As she passed the east wing's curtained door, she paused. She put her hand flat against the curtain fabric and felt through it the solidity of the door behind it. Behind that door was a man who was 25 years old and had been ill enough that his household had spent years building a fiction around him to keep him safe. Behind that door was the person who had, from a room she had never been invited into, decided that she was the right answer to a question she had not been told was being asked. She pressed her palm against the curtain for 3 full seconds. Then she moved her hand and walked on. That evening at dinner, she was sitting at her end of the table, book open, when she looked up and found Lord Shen watching her from his end of the table with an expression that had, for once, abandoned its careful neutrality entirely. He looked like a person who had just been told something and was working out what to do with it. She looked back at him. Mrs. Holt spoke to me, he said. She told me what I needed to know, she said. I should have, he stopped, started again. The arrangement should have been explained more completely before. Before the ceremony that was already a legal document, she said. He didn't look away. Yes. She turned a page of her book. You did not arrange the marriage. You managed the one that was arranged. There is a difference, he said. There are several differences, she said. I am working out which ones matter and which ones I can set aside. He was quiet for a moment. Then, are there ones you can set aside? She looked at him across the long table. She thought about the portrait and the journal and the tray that went in every morning at 6:55, and the careful fiction that had been built around this house to keep a young, sick man safe from the world's specific hungers. Ask me again in a month, she said. She went back to her book. Across the table, after a moment he did the same. The night it happened was a Wednesday in mid-December, cold enough that the east-facing windows had grown thin white patterns of frost along their lower edges, and the wind had found every gap in the old stone and was making its opinion of those gaps clearly known. Mei Lin had been awake for an hour, not from any particular distress, but from the particular kind of alertness that came with living in a house where you were still discovering what ordinary sounded like. She had learned over the past weeks the sounds of Renwick Hall at night, the specific creak of the third stair on the east corridor, the sound the old heating pipes made when the temperature dropped below a certain point, the rhythm of the night watchman's rounds, which varied slightly depending on whether it was Peter Ash or the older man, Mr. Harold Tate, who took the duty. She had been lying still and cataloging these sounds when a new sound appeared. Not dramatic, not alarming exactly. A door. Then footsteps rapid, not the careful measured pace of someone going somewhere with a plan, but the faster rhythm of someone responding to something they had not expected. Then voices, low and brief, from the direction of the east wing. She was out of bed before she had finished deciding to be. She pulled a heavy coat over her nightclothes, put on shoes, and opened her bedroom door into the corridor. The hallway was dim. The lamps burned low at night, giving just enough light to see the floor, and she stood and listened. The sounds were coming from the direction of the curtained service entrance to the east wing. She moved toward them. She was not running. She was walking with intent and speed, which was different. She pushed past the curtain and opened the service door, which was unlocked from this side. A short corridor. Plain stone, no portraits, the practical bones of the house that no one decorated because no one expected guests here. 2 lamps burning in brackets on the wall. At the far end, a door standing open, light spilling through it. She walked toward the light. Lord Shen was in the corridor just outside the open door, speaking quietly to a woman Mei Lin did not recognize, perhaps 40, with the white coat and the brisk manner of someone who had been woken and had arrived professionally intact despite it. A doctor, she thought, or a medical attendant of some kind. Is it the same as last month? Lord Shen was asking. More acute, the woman said. The cold is not helping. We need to keep the room warmer than it has been. She glanced at Mei Lin, a brief professional assessment neutral. Lord Shen turned. He was in his shirt sleeves. No coat, no cravat, hair that had clearly been disordered by sleep and not tidied since. She had never seen him like this, without the careful composition of his daytime presentation. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, exactly his age. "You heard," he said. "I heard something," she said. "I did not know what it was." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not read in the low light. Then he said to the woman, "Is he settled?" "For now, the medicine is working. He should sleep." Lord Shen nodded. The woman went back through the open door, pulling it partially closed behind her. He looked at Mei Lin. "It is his lungs," he said. "He has attacks sometimes, particularly in winter." "I know about his lungs," she said. A pause. He absorbed that without visible reaction. "Mrs. Holt." "Yes." They stood in the plain corridor in the low lamplight, and she was aware that this was the first time she had ever been on this side of the curtain, and the first time she had ever seen him without the layer of careful arrangement that he wore during the day. He was not wearing it now. He looked tired and worried, and the worry was honest, not performed, not managed. Just there, the way worry looked when you stopped spending energy on hiding it. "Is he often like this?" she asked. "Not always." He leaned against the corridor wall. "Winter is the worst. The cold tightens everything. Last winter was better. The year before was not." "How long has this been his life?" Lord Shen was quiet for a moment. "Since he was 8, he said. "He was very ill for a long period when he was young. He recovered mostly, but the lungs never came all the way back." She thought about a boy of 8 who had been very ill and had recovered mostly, but not all the way. About the careful fiction that had been built around him as he grew. about the portrait of a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old, and the ring on the younger one's hand that said, "This estate is his, protect it." "He is not mad," she said. "No," Lord Shen said. "He has never been mad. He has been ill, and he has been isolated, and he has been careful. His mind is entirely intact." She looked at the partially open door at the end of the corridor. Through the gap she could see the edge of a room that was warm and lamplit, warmer than anywhere else in the house. "He read about me," she said. "It was not a question." "He considered the arrangement for 4 months before he made it," Lord Shen said. "He corresponded with your father's solicitor. He requested information." A pause. "He was thorough." "What kind of information?" "Your record, your history, what was said about you by people who had known you." He paused again. "He was interested in whether you were the kind of person who paid attention." She looked at him. "And what did they say?" "That you were," he said. She stood with that for a moment. "And you," she asked, "what did you say when you were told about this arrangement?" He did not answer immediately. His eyes went briefly to the door at the end of the corridor. "I said that it was not his decision to make alone," he said. "That it involved someone who should have been told more honestly what she was agreeing to." He disagreed. He said that if he told you everything, you would make your decision based on what you were told rather than what you found, and that what you found would tell him something that a direct report from his own household could not. She went very still. "He was testing me," she said. "He was learning you," Lord Shen said carefully. "That is not the same thing. It is close enough to be uncomfortable." "Yes," he said, "I know." They stood in the corridor, and the frost wind found even this inner part of the house and moved through it. And from behind the partially open door there was no sound, which meant the medicine was working, and the young duke who had read about her for 4 months before arranging to marry her was sleeping. "What is his name?" she asked. "His actual name, not the title." Lord Shen looked at her. Something in the careful neutrality of his expression shifted, the same small shift she had been seeing at dinner for weeks, too specific to be blank, not yet specific enough to name. "Oliver," he said. "His name is Oliver Renwick." She said the name quietly to herself. Oliver, not a word that went with the enormous stone house and the locked east wing and the rumors of an old mad duke. Oliver was a young name, a name that a 12-year-old in a portrait could have, a name that a 25-year-old, ill and isolated and thorough in his considerations, could be. "I want to meet him," she said. Lord Shen's expression did not change, but his posture shifted, that small unconscious adjustment of a person recalibrating. "He will not want that," he said. "Not yet he is." "Embarrassed," she said. A pause. "Perhaps," Lord Shen said. "He arranged a marriage without telling me who he was, and now that I know, he is embarrassed." She let that sit. "I understand that. I am not angry about it. I am telling you that I want to meet him because he is my husband, and he is 25 years old, and he has been ill tonight, and he is in a room 20 feet away from me, and I think it is time." Lord Shen looked at her for a long moment. "Not tonight," he said. She accepted that, "when he is well enough." "Yes." She looked one more time at the partially open door at the end of the corridor, at the warm, lamplit edge of the room beyond it, and then she turned and walked back toward the curtain and her own side of the house. Behind her, Lord Shen said, "He will not know what to do with you." She paused, did not turn around. "Most people don't," she said, and went through the curtain and back to her room. She did not sleep again that night. She lay on her back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about a 25-year-old man who had read about her for 4 months, and decided she was the kind of person who paid attention and chose her on that basis, from a room he had not left in months, through a cold winter that kept tightening his lungs. She thought about what kind of loneliness produced that particular kind of decision. about what it meant to be so careful about the world that the only way you could let someone into your life was to set them a test they did not know they were taking. She did not feel the anger she had expected to feel. She felt something more complicated than anger, something that included anger but was not only anger, a mix of feeling that did not yet have a name, and that she was not ready to name yet because she was not finished gathering the information she needed to understand what she was actually feeling. Outside, the wind had eased. The frost on the windows held its white patterns against the dark. She put her hand flat on the wall beside her bed. 20 feet, 2 walls and a curtain, and a locked corridor between her and a man named Oliver Renwick, 25 years old, lungs that never quite came all the way back, who had chosen her the way you chose things you could not afford to choose wrong. She pressed her palm against the wall and kept it there until the cold of the stone moved up through her skin, and then she breathed out and lay back down and closed her eyes and lay very still and waited for the morning to arrive. 4 days after the night in the corridor, a note appeared on the table in her sitting room, not left by any staff member she had seen, not delivered through any normal channel. It was simply there one morning when she came in from breakfast, folded once, no name on the outside, placed at the center of the table the way things were placed when the person placing them had thought carefully about placement. She sat down and opened it. The handwriting was the same as the contract. That same precise, controlled hand that she had seen on the sealed document, in the journal, in the monthly letters that were the only regular evidence anyone had of the Duke's existence. It said, "I understand that you now know more than you were meant to know at this point. I apologize for the sequence of events that made this so abrupt. If you are willing, I would like to write to you." No signature, but it did not need one. She sat with the note for a long time. Then she went to her desk and wrote back on a clean sheet of her own paper, in her own clear handwriting, which was nothing like a machine and everything like a person who had written a great deal and found her own particular way of doing it. She wrote, "I am willing." She folded it once and left it on the center of the table. It was gone by afternoon. The correspondence that followed was unlike anything she had done before, and she had done a number of things. She had never received letters from someone who was 20 feet away. She had never exchanged written words with a person she had not yet seen. She had never had a conversation in which the entire medium was a sheet of paper appearing and disappearing from a table in a room she was living in, passed by unknown means through walls she could not see through. It was, she thought, the strangest and most honest conversation she had ever had. Because he wrote to her the way the journal had told her he thought, directly, without social decoration, with a precision that was not coldness but its opposite, the kind of precision you employed when you were very afraid of being misunderstood. He asked her things, not things designed to flatter or to be asked, things he actually wanted to know. He asked her what she had thought when she first saw the chair at the ceremony. He asked her what she had been looking for in the library when she reorganized it. He asked her if she had been frightened the night she came through the curtain into the east corridor. She answered honestly, all of it. She told him that the chair had been more informative than a person might have been. She told him that she had reorganized the library because disorder was a form of waste, and also because she had wanted to see who would notice. She told him that she had not been frightened the night in the corridor. She had been, she told him precisely, curious. He wrote back, "I believe that is what I hoped." She wrote back, "What did you hope?" He wrote that you would find the situation interesting rather than impossible. People who find things interesting manage them better than people who are simply trying to survive them. She considered that. She wrote, "You were not sure I would." He wrote, and there was a long gap before this note appeared, an hour or more, which meant he had thought about it. "No, I was not sure of anything. I read everything I could find. I thought about it for a long time, but thinking about a person is not the same as knowing them." She wrote, "And now." The next note came back more quickly. "I am beginning to." She pressed her lips together and did not smile, and then smiled anyway, because there was no one in the room to see it. Over the next 2 weeks the notes accumulated. She kept them in the drawer of her writing desk, which she began to lock at night, not because she thought anyone would read them, because they were hers, because she was choosing to keep them. She learned things, not from what he said explicitly, but from the particular shape of what he chose to say, the same way she had read the journal, alert to the spaces between the words. He had been educated at the estate, not because the illness prevented him from attending school. There had been periods when he was well enough, he said, somewhat plainly, to have managed it, but because Lord Shen had decided, when Oliver was 12, that school presented specific risks that he was not willing to manage. He had said this to a room of solicitors and had not been overruled. Oliver had had tutors instead, good ones, 3 of them in succession, and he had read everything they had not taught him as well. He had an opinion about the organization of the South Library that was different from hers and slightly wrong, which she told him, and he wrote back a rebuttal that was well-reasoned but still slightly wrong, and she told him that too, and the next note she received was a hand-drawn diagram of how he proposed the natural history volume should be shelved. The diagram was precise, and also incorrect in a way that suggested he had very strong opinions and not enough information. She wrote, "You have never been in the South Library." He wrote after a pause, "No." She wrote, "Come and see it then." He wrote, "That is not something I am prepared to do." She wrote, "Why?" He wrote, and this note took longer than any previous one, and the handwriting, when it came, was slightly less even than usual, as though it had been written in a state of feeling rather than a state of planning, "Because meeting me will end this. What we have in these letters is something I am not ready to finish. Once you have seen me, once you know the full reality of what is in this wing of this house, everything we have built in these pages will be altered. I am not ready for it to be altered." She read that note 3 times. Then she wrote, "I am not going to stop writing to you when I meet you." He wrote, "You cannot know that." She wrote, "I can know things. It is one of the things I am good at." A long pause. Then, "What else are you good at?" And the conversation turned and went on, and she lay on her bed some nights with the current letter propped against her knees and thought about the strangeness of it. That she was here in this enormous house, married to a title, and the title was a person, and the person was in the next wing, and they were building something in paper and ink that was already more honest than most things she had done in her life. Lord Shen noticed. He did not say anything directly, but at dinner he began to stay at the table a little longer after the meal, and once he asked her what she was reading, which was the first time he had asked her that. She told him. He said he had read it, which she had guessed, and they had a brief conversation about it, not performance, not social obligation, but a real exchange of opinion, his somewhat contrary to hers in a way that was illuminating rather than combative. "You are different lately," he said one evening. "I was always like this," she said. "You were not looking." He considered that. "Perhaps," he said. She looked at him. She had been thinking over the past weeks about what he was, not what he managed or what role he occupied in the household, but what he was as a person, and the picture that had assembled itself, from the journal and the notes and the dinners and the corridor at midnight, was of someone who had organized his entire life around a responsibility he had chosen so early and held so consistently that it had become indistinguishable from his character. He had been 17 when the portrait was painted. He had been, she thought, somewhere in his early 20s when he had made the decisions that shaped this household into what it was. He had built the fiction of the old Mad Duke to protect the young ill one. He had managed the accounts and the staff and the legal correspondence and the monthly letters and the 6:55 morning tray, and he had done all of this for so long that the estate's functioning was simply another name for his attention. "Do you ever wish it were different?" she asked. He looked at her. The candle on the table between them, the dining room staff had given up on the formal candelabra after the first week, and now simply put one candle on whatever side of the long table was actually being used, cast a light that was more honest than afternoon. "Every arrangement has its costs," he said. "I made mine a long time ago." "That is not what I asked." A pause, he looked at the candle. "Yes," he said, "sometimes." She nodded. She did not push further. Some answers were complete in themselves. She went back to her room that evening and sat at her writing desk and opened the locked drawer and took out the most recent letter and read it again. It was a letter about books mostly, and about the question of whether reading a large number of books on a single subject made you more knowledgeable about that subject or more aware of how much you did not know. He had an opinion that it was the latter necessarily, and that this was not a failure of books but their most important function. She had agreed in her reply and added, "Which is why I keep reading." He had written back, "Same reason." She put the letter away and locked the drawer and sat for a while in the quiet of her sitting room, listening to the sounds of the house at night, all the sounds she now knew by name. Then she took out a fresh piece of paper and wrote, "I think we should meet. Not because I need to, because you do. Because you have been in that room long enough and the world is still out here and I am part of it now and I am not going anywhere." She folded it once and left it on the table. In the morning it was gone. No note came back that day or the next. On the third morning she found one. It said, in handwriting that was very even and very careful, which was its own kind of answer, "Give me a week." She wrote back, "Agreed," and put it on the table. She went back to her book and turned the page, and outside the frost held its patterns on the glass, and the oaks were bare and still, and the house breathed around her with all its sounds she knew. And she waited, as she had always been very good at waiting, with the particular patience of someone who understood that the things worth waiting for were worth the full weight of the wait. On the 8th day, one day past the agreed week, which she did not mention, Lord Shen came to find her in the library. She was at the window chair reading, and she heard his footsteps in the corridor and identified them before he appeared in the doorway, that slight asymmetry in the stride, the left side longer than the right, the pattern she had memorized without particularly trying to. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "He would like to see you," he said, "if you are still willing." She put a marker in her book. She stood up. She smoothed her dress in one brief automatic gesture and then stopped, because smoothing her dress was the kind of preparation you made when you were anxious about a meeting, and she was not anxious. She was, accurately, interested. "Now," she asked. "Whenever you are ready." She picked up her book. She did not know why. She simply did not want to leave it. And she followed Lord Shen out of the library and down the corridor, and past the curtain and through the service door into the east wing. The corridor looked the same as it had that night, plain stone, 2 lamps, the practical bones of the house. She walked beside Lord Shen and did not speak, and he did not speak, and the silence between them was comfortable in the way that silence only was between people who had established that they could share it without filling it. He stopped outside the door at the end and knocked twice, gently. "Come in," said a voice from the other side. She had been hearing that voice, very faintly, through walls on the edges of nights for weeks, and she had assembled from those faint, overheard fragments a rough impression, quiet, deliberate, capable of precision. The voice on the other side of the door confirmed what she had assembled. It was a young man's voice that had learned to be careful with itself. Lord Shen opened the door and stood aside. She went in. The room was warm, very warm compared to the rest of the house. The fire built up substantially, the windows covered with heavy curtains that admitted no draught, lamps on every surface, books, more books than she had seen anywhere outside the library, arranged in a system that appeared to be entirely personal and possibly only logical to the person who lived with it. A large desk near the far wall covered in papers and correspondence. A chair by the fire with a blanket folded on its arm. A bed on the far side, unmade, because it had clearly not been slept in tonight but lived in, the particular disarray of someone who spends time in bed not sleeping but reading and working. And in the chair by the fire, standing up as she entered, the specific, careful movement of someone who had decided to stand up regardless of the effort it cost, a young man. He was not what the portrait had suggested. The portrait had shown him at 12, all childhood not yet resolved into adulthood. He was fully adult now, and had the particular quality of someone who had become adult somewhat earlier than the usual schedule, because circumstances had not given him the option of a longer approach. He was slight, not dramatically, but noticeably, the kind of physical narrowness that came with years of an illness that cost you something. His face was arresting, because it was extremely alive in a way that was immediately obvious. The eyes in particular, which were doing what she recognized as an extremely thorough assessment of her, while simultaneously attempting to appear as if they were doing nothing of the kind. He was not succeeding at the appearance. He was very good at assessment, and not quite as good at pretending he wasn't. "You reorganized the South Library," he said. Not hello, not the expected opening, directly to what was on his mind. "I did," she said. "I still think the natural history volumes belong on the east wall." "You sent me a diagram," she said. "You didn't change anything." "No," she said, "the diagram was wrong." He looked at her, a long moment, and then he laughed, a brief, quiet sound as if he had been saving it. He sat back down in the chair, which she understood was because standing cost more than the brief period of it had covered, and he gestured at the chair across from him. "Please sit," he said. I thought about this conversation many times. I am finding the reality of it harder to navigate than I expected." She sat down. She put her book on her knee. "You thought about this conversation," she said. "Since the morning the first letter arrived back. I kept expecting to have it by letter. It was easier by letter." "Most things are," she said. "That is the appeal of letters, they give you time." "Yes," he looked at the fire. "I'm sorry," he said, "for how this was arranged. There was a better way to begin this. I chose what I thought was the most honest path, and I see now that I was confusing honesty with whatever serves my particular limitations best." She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the fire in the way people looked at fires when they were saying something they had been storing. "You wanted me to find out for myself rather than be told," she said. "Because you needed to know what kind of person I was. And a person who is handed information and simply accepts it tells you less than a person who follows it to its source." He looked at her. "Yes. And a person who is angry at being tested would tell you something too." "Yes." "I am not angry," she said. "I was briefly. The night I found the portrait, I am past it." "Why?" he asked, direct again, the way the letters had been direct. She thought about it honestly before she answered. "Because anger at an arrangement requires me to believe the arrangement was only about power, and I have seen the journal, and I have read your letters, and you are not a person who arranges things out of a desire for power. You are a person who was alone in a warm room for too long and needed to not be alone anymore and chose the most careful method you could find." She paused. "That is not nothing." He was very still. "I wrote in the journal," he said, "that it was in the library." "Yes." "I left it there." She looked at him. "The whole thing?" she asked. 14 years of entries." "From about 6 months after your arrival date was set," he said. "I wrote them differently after that, knowing they might be found." She sat with that. He had been writing the journal for her. Not for her to find immediately, for her to find when she was ready, when she had been here long enough to read it with context rather than without it. "You are very thorough," she said. "I have had a great deal of time to think," he said, "and not many other ways to, I mean that I have." He stopped, started again. "I am better in letters," he said. "You are not bad in person," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'm better in letters," he said again. She looked around the room. at the books arranged in their personal system, at the papers on the desk, at the lamp on the bedside table and the stack of volumes beside it, at the curtained windows that kept the cold out. "Tell me about the system," she said. "What system?" "For the books, there is a logic to it. I can almost see it, but not quite." He looked at her with the expression she had been watching from the portrait, that direct, assessing, unafraid look. And then he looked at his books, and a different kind of expression replaced it. The expression of someone who had just been asked to show something they were very fond of. "The first grouping," he said, "is by the question that the book answers, not the subject, the question." "Show me," she said. He stood up again, that careful, deliberate movement, and she followed him to the first shelf, and he began to explain, and she listened and asked questions, and he answered them. And outside the winter pressed against the heavy curtains and the fire held its warmth around them, and time did what it sometimes did in moments that were more honest than ordinary. It moved at a different pace, neither fast nor slow, simply present and full. Lord Shen, she noted when she eventually left the East Wing an hour later, had not come into the room at all. He had stood in the corridor outside with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, and she passed him on the way out, and he opened his eyes and looked at her, and she said nothing, and he said nothing, and it was understood between them, without words, that whatever had happened in that room was something that neither of them needed to explain to the other. She went back to the main wing. She still had her book in her hand. She sat down at her writing desk and opened her journal and wrote the date and underneath it, Oliver. Just the name was enough. January brought a cold that did not ease and an argument that did not ease either, and both of them turned out to be more informative than the months before them. The cold settled into the estate with the particular determination of a winter that had decided to be thorough. Mr. Rowe wrapped the garden roses and packed the tender plants against the walls and moved with his usual economy of expression through the frozen grounds, doing everything that needed to be done without being asked, and without making any statement about the fact that he was doing it. Inside, the household adjusted. More fires, more wood, more vigilance about the drafts in the East Wing corridors. And Mei Lin began going to the East Wing not once but 4, 5, 6 times a week. She went after breakfast, when Oliver was sharpest and the morning medicine had settled, and the day was still young enough to have all its thinking in it. She went in the early afternoon sometimes, when they had begun leaving something at a point where picking it up again was more natural than ending it. She went less often in the evenings, because evenings were harder for him. A fact he told her himself plainly, without making it larger than it was. The evenings were when the lungs remembered themselves. They argued. She had not expected that specifically, not because she had expected him to be agreeable, but because she had not anticipated that two people who communicated as carefully as they did would produce so much friction when the communication was real-time rather than epistolary. He was quicker in person than letters suggested. He corrected her when he thought she was wrong, without cushioning the correction, which was the same thing she did to him and which she found in him, both infuriating and, in the same breath, the first real respect she had been paid in years. She had told him about the South Library reorganization one morning in detail, explaining the logic of her subject-based system. "But the geography volumes," he said, "they belong with the natural sciences." "Geography is not a natural science, it is a discipline. That distinction is invented." "All distinctions are invented," she said. "The question is whether the invented distinction is useful. Is it useful to separate geography from science? It is useful if you are looking for a book about rivers and need to distinguish between how rivers form and where rivers go." He considered that. She watched him consider it. He had a particular way of thinking that was visible if you were paying attention, a slight stillness that was different from his resting stillness, more internal. "Then the geography volume should be split," he said. "Geological geography with the natural sciences, political and physical mapping separately. That is twice as many categories. That is more accurate categories. She looked at him. You have never been in the library. I know every book in it. That is not the same as knowing a library. He opened his mouth, closed it. A rare moment. She had cataloged 3 of them now when he came up against the specific limit of having learned everything he knew from within 40 feet of where he currently sat. It was not an argument-ending limit. He was too honest for it to become a place he defended from. It was simply accurate, and he accepted accuracy even when it was inconvenient, which was one of the things about him that she trusted most. I know, he said. I will make a compromise, she said. The geological geography volumes move to the natural sciences shelf. The rest stays where it is. And when you are able to come to the library yourself, you are welcome to rearrange it entirely. He looked at the fire. That may not be. I said when you are able, she said. Not gently, not harshly. Simply as a fact about a future she was treating as real. He was quiet for a moment. The argument that happened 3 weeks into January was a different kind. Not the good friction of 2 minds working against each other on an interesting problem, but the kind that happened when something real was in the room and neither of them was entirely ready to address it directly. It started over the monthly letter. She had been in the East Wing when Mrs. Holt brought in the correspondence, and among it was the packet of monthly communications that went out under the Duke's seal. The letters that were the official evidence of his existence to the outside world. She watched Oliver review them and sign them with the same controlled handwriting she had known before she knew him. Do you dictate the content? She asked. I write them, he said. Adrian reviews them. Lord Shen reviews your own correspondence. A pause. It is not. The letters serve a specific function. He reviews them to ensure they are consistent. Consistent with the fiction, she said. Oliver set down his pen. He did not look at her immediately. When he did, his expression had the quality of a person who had known a conversation was coming and had been hoping it would arrive in a different shape than the one it was taking. The arrangement protects the estate, he said. The arrangement protected the estate when you were 12 and ill and unable to manage it yourself, she said. You are 25 now. You manage everything in this room. The arrangement protects a fiction about who you are. The fiction protects me. From what? She asked. Specifically, what is the thing you are afraid of? He was very still. People who know the Duke is young and isolated and without a direct heir make calculations, he said. They have always made those calculations. When I was a child, Adrian removed me from every situation where those calculations were being made. He built this. He stopped. He built something that kept me safe. You are no longer a child, she said. I know that. And I am here now, she said. I am part of this estate. My being here changes the calculation you are talking about, regardless of whether the fiction exists or not. Anyone looking at this household who is paying attention will notice that there is a new Duchess, and she is not, in any way, the wife of a 70-year-old man. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not defensively, but in the way of someone arriving at a thought from a direction they had not expected. You are right, he said. I know. That is not helpful, he said. But there was something in his voice that was not quite dry amusement but was adjacent to it. I am almost never unhelpful, she said. I am sometimes inconvenient. He pressed his lips together in that way she had begun to recognize. The expression of a person choosing not to smile and failing at the not smiling part. What are you suggesting? He said. I am not suggesting anything yet, she said. I am telling you that the fiction has a timeline and the timeline is running. I want you to think about that. He looked at the correspondence on his desk. The neat stack of letters that were, month by month, the wall between his real life and the world's knowledge of it. Adrian will, he started. Lord Shen is not the one making this decision, she said quietly. He looked at her sharply. She held his gaze. She was not saying it to be harsh. She was saying it because it was true, and because one of the things the months of letters had established between them was that she did not spare him from true things, and he did not want her to. He has managed everything for a long time, Oliver said. Yes. It would be, he paused. I owe him more than I can describe. I know, she said. And what you owe him is not cancelled by the fact that you are the Duke and the decisions about this estate are yours to make. Those are two separate things. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the winter pressed against the heavy curtains. The fire held its ground. I will think about it, he said. That is enough, she said. She left the east wing that afternoon and found Lord Shen in the main hallway in a way that was not quite coincidental. He had been coming from the direction of his rooms, and she had been going toward hers, and the intersection was slightly too precise to be entirely accidental. How is he? He asked. Well, she said, we had an argument. Lord Shen looked at her. About what? About the fiction, she said. About timelines. Something moved in his expression, complicated, layered, the expression of a person who had been expecting this conversation and was not sure whether to be relieved or defensive about its arrival. It has kept him safe, he said. I know, she said. You built it and you maintained it and it did exactly what it was supposed to do, and now things have changed. She looked at him steadily. You know they have changed. He looked at the floor for a moment. Just a moment. Then he looked back at her with an expression she had not seen in him before, something that was tired in an old way, the exhaustion of a person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had not let himself notice the weight until just now. I know, he said. She nodded. She moved past him down the corridor. At the corner she stopped. He said he owes you more than he can describe, she said, without turning around. A pause behind her. He doesn't owe me anything, Lord Shen said. That, she said, is precisely what he knew you would say. She turned the corner and went back to her rooms and sat at her desk and opened her journal and wrote for a long time, not summary, not accounting, but thinking on paper, which was what journals were actually for. She wrote about what she had found in this house, about what it had cost each of them to build what they had built here, the two men and the household around them, about what it would cost to change it. She wrote, the right thing is rarely the easy thing, but the people in this house are more than their arrangements. It is time they were allowed to be. She closed the journal. Outside, a bird called once in the frozen garden and then was quiet, and the winter held everything in its cold and careful grip. And inside the house, on both sides of the curtained door, two people were separately thinking about the same conversation and arriving slowly at the same place. February came in quieter than January, which was not always the case with February, but which this year felt earned, as if the season understood that the people in the house were in the middle of something and had chosen to give them the space for it. Oliver began asking her about the world. Not in the way someone asks when they do not know. He knew a great deal about the world, had read about it thoroughly, had corresponded with people in it through the careful proxy of the monthly letters for years. He asked in the way someone asked when they knew the facts but wanted the texture. What did the city sound like in the mornings? What did the market smell like? What was it like to sit in a library that was not your own? She told him, all of it. She had found, good at descriptions that carried texture, not because she was sentimental but because she had always paid attention to the physical particulars of things, the specific quality of light at a specific time of day, the way certain sounds were distinctive enough to belong only to their source. He listened with the full concentration of someone who was doing more than listening, who was building something from what she gave him, adding it to what he already had, constructing a picture that was more complete with each piece she added. One afternoon she told him about the river they had crossed on the way to the estate, the old stone bridge, the water dark and fast below it, the flowers someone had left on the railing. White flowers, she said, simple ones, the kind from fields. He was quiet for a moment. People leave flowers on that bridge, he said. They have for a long time. There is a story about it, a woman who crossed it 100 years ago on the way to something and left flowers as an offering for a safe arrival. Did she arrive safely? She did, he said. She is buried in the estate grounds, actually. She married the Duke of that time. The flowers are, I suppose they are for her, or for the bridge itself, or for the idea of going towards something and arriving. She looked at him. You know the history of that bridge. I know the history of most things near the estate. I have had a great deal of time and a very good library. You know more about the world than you are in it, she said. He looked at her directly. Yes. That is going to change, she said. Not as a challenge, not as a promise exactly, more like a statement about a fact that had not yet occurred but was no longer hypothetical. He was quiet. Then, I had a doctor, a different one than now, the one before, who was here when I was young, who said to me once that I had a very good chance of a long life if I was careful. He said careful like a door closing, like the price of the long life was the size of it. And the current doctor, Dr. Elaine Marsh, a pause. She says something different. She says the lungs are what they are, and the cold is the worst of it, and there are things that will always be harder and things that will not be, and that careful does not mean small. He looked at the fire. She has been saying that for 3 years. I have been selective about believing it. And now, he looked at her, the direct, assessing, unafraid look. Now I find I am revising my position, he said. She did not say anything. She turned her book over in her hands and looked at the fire alongside him, and let that be what it was, a thing said and heard and allowed to stand without being managed. The argument with Lord Shen happened the 2nd week of February. She heard it. They were not shouting. Neither of them were people who shouted, but the east wing was less insulated from the main corridor than she had previously understood, and she was in the library. And the voices that came through the wall were low and controlled and heated, in the way of people who had spent many years knowing each other well enough to cut precisely. She did not try to hear the specific words. The tone was enough. She stayed in the library until the voices stopped. Then she went to her sitting room and sat by the window and waited. An hour later, Lord Shen knocked on her door. She had not told him to come. He simply knew. As she had come to understand, he simply knew most things about the house and the people in it, where she would be and that she would be there. He told me, Lord Shen said, standing in the doorway. He had the expression of a person coming back from a distance, not quite arrived yet, still somewhere in the middle of it. Sit down, she said, not unkindly. He sat in the chair across from hers. They sat for a moment in the particular silence of people who have been brought to the same point from different directions. He wants to stop the fiction, he said. Yes. He wants to write to begin corresponding under his own name, to present himself to the governor in the spring. He stopped. He has made a list, he said, and something in the way he said it, slightly bewildered, slightly not, told her that the list was characteristic, that Oliver's thoroughness had been a known quantity for years, and that being presented with a list of changes was both entirely expected.